One can argue that every living creature lives with expectation. We expect each day that the sun will rise, that the earth will turn, that we will continue breathing for another day. These expectations are built upon past experiences and, for the most part, these fundamental expectations about nature and life continue to be met by reality. Just as we have logical expectations grounded in our understanding of our reality and past experiences, so too do we have emotional expectations shaped by similar past experiences. These emotional expectations shape many of our daily experiences, whether they be related to work, romantic relationships, friendships, or family. These expectations are built layer by layer through consistent experience, and when these emotional expectations are met, they are reinforced and become stronger. However, when our emotional expectations are not met, our emotional equilibrium is disturbed. When a planned romantic evening with a partner is derailed by that partner's disclosure of infidelity, the emotional expectation of intimacy is replaced by feelings of betrayal and pain. This disjunction between expectation and experience amplifies the feeling of emotional pain and can lead to disconnection or rejection of that emotional narrative. The emotional expectations surrounding the narratives in our lives are not much different from the emotional expectations we have about the narratives we consume. When we sit down for an evening of Netflix and chill with a partner and put on a romantic movie, we want and expect to be swept away by our story about romance and love. We want to connect with the protagonist and share that feeling of falling in love. When we pick up a new fantasy novel by our favorite author, we read the jacket and get an idea of the story. We are introduced to the protagonist, the conflict, and the surrounding theme of the story. Combine that information with the knowledge of the author and our experience with that genre, and we craft an expectation of the emotional journey we're likely to experience within that story. We consciously seek out stories that fill an emotional need or desire. So, if we think the expected emotional journey will fill that need, we're more likely to read the book, or watch the movie, or listen to the audiobook narrated by a favorite reader. But what happens when we take that journey and find those emotional expectations we hold are not met? If the narrative fails to meet those expectations, are we likely to read more from that author? Do we leave a bad review? Or do we put the book down after repeated disappointments? Whatever our action may be, it's not a positive assessment of the narrative or its author. And that lack of positive reaction can translate into lackluster book sales or poor box office results for a film. Real-world critical and financial implications for those that create these narratives. However, what if our emotional expectations are exceeded? What happens when we are so caught up in the story and the characters, so entranced by the emotional narrative journey, that we can't put the book down? We all know those stories that we don't finish until 2 a.m. because we're too engrossed to sleep, and we can't stop until we turn the last page and finally have some emotional closure. We know those movies that keep us on the edge of our seat the entire time, emotionally invested in the story, with the entire audience cheering at the climactic moments. We walk out of the theater eagerly anticipating the next film in the franchise. These narratives that exceed our emotional expectations are the real blockbusters, and ticket sales are only one of the benchmarks of their success. But how do the creators of these narratives know that the story they've crafted can satisfy the emotional expectations and needs of their audience before the book is published or the film is released? Every good story passes through the hands of multiple people experienced in the art of storytelling. And just like a reader or a viewer, they're human and have similar emotional expectations. However, what if there were a tool that could assist these creators and narrative experts in editing and refining a story before it was released? A tool that could better predict the success or failure of a narrative. I propose that by analyzing a host of past narratives in a given genre and medium, a framework of successful and unsuccessful emotional journeys could be created. This predictive model of emotional expectation would be based on hundreds of past narratives in that same genre with full knowledge of what succeeded and what failed miserably. This proposed model would be based upon a map of emotional pivot points within each narrative. Think of a roadmap that could guide one along the best route to a given destination. Some routes would have warning signs, while others would provide a clear direction to the most efficient path to one's destination. But what is an emotional pivot point, and why is it an important metric? When an important emotional event occurs within the narrative, then pivots into a new emotional direction, that is an emotional pivot point. Every narrative that emotionally engages the audience has these emotional pivot points. And when we enter into a given narrative, we have certain unconscious emotional expectations about how and when emotional pivot points should occur. When those expectations aren't met, we can become emotionally disconnected from the story. But when those expectations are exceeded, it can enhance our engagement and bring us further into the story, closer to the characters, and more invested in their journey. So, if this predictive model is the what, let's take a moment to talk about the why. Why is it important to create narratives that better satisfy our emotional expectations and needs? There are, of course, the obvious financial incentives, as well as greater critical or literary success. But what about the readers and the viewers? What do we, the audience, gain from these stories that have a greater likelihood of meeting our emotional expectations? Well, humans are a storytelling species. Through stories, we pass on wisdom, knowledge, and our experiences about life, the world, loss, love, humor, and the like. As readers, listeners, or viewers, we receive these things, but when we have emotional engagement with the story, our emotional needs can be, at least partly, satisfied through the shared emotional journey of the characters we've come to identify with. In stories, we can experience the thrill and danger as seen through the eyes of James Bond. We can feel the sense of achievement as we scale Everest for the first time. We can fall in love, again and again, from the emotional safety of our couches. Through these stories, we have the opportunity to experience the full emotional range of the human experience to a degree that is usually inaccessible in our everyday lives. By improving the stories we consume, we help to ensure that these stories meet or exceed our emotional needs and expectations. The idea of this predictive model of emotional expectations is that it can help ensure that the final product of any given narrative is primed for critical and financial success and positive reception with readers or viewers. But the cold reality is that if a tool such as this was created and proved accurate in its predictions, it could too easily be manipulated in the worst ways. Only those stories that were primed to be successful would see the light of day, and anything that wasn't predicted to be wildly successful would never see publication or theatrical release. But we need to foster potential failure as much as we do success. We need writers and artists to know that they have the freedom to take risks and the encouragement to push that envelope of expectation. We need our creative minds to step outside the box of what is normal, expected, and predicted. If we only leave room for the best and the formulaic, we risk squashing the potential and the spark of unknown creative geniuses. No matter how accurate the predictions of this theoretical model could be, it would only ever be one tool among many, and not always the best tool by which to measure success.